collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Let me start by wishing you a very happy new year, and let's hope that 2022 will be a little less fraught than last year. That said, there are new measures now again for the coronavirus, so let's see how we go as the year wears on. But we're not going to talk about COVID on this week's programme. We're going to talk instead about cars and the true cost of ownership. We've seen so many infrastructure projects, roads being built all over the island, but does that just encourage more people to get into more cars when the Green Deal and a lot of the European funding we've had is based on the premise that we'll get people out of cars and get them either walking or onto bicycles and more environmentally friendly mobility solutions. The Cyprus Technical Chamber, ETEC, recently published in its newsletter an article outlining the true cost of car ownership, including a lot of things that many motorists don't even consider. The author was my next guest. He is Yannis Kakoulis, who is the Limassol District Secretary of that Cyprus Technical Chamber. He joins us now. Yannis, fascinating reading, because you did go into an awful lot of things, as I just mentioned, that a lot of motorists don't even consider when they think of how much it costs them to own a car. We are terribly reliant on our cars in Cyprus, and I think we have one of the highest per capita number of cars in the European Union.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We are actually, Cyprus is at top of the list in the European Union together with Luxembourg regarding the number of cars per capita. We're really on top. And of course the reason is because we have no alternative transport. People use public transport, the buses, very, very little for a number of reasons. And people also don't use the bicycles enough. I mean, we see a small number of people recently using the bicycles, but not enough, not by any means.
But that's partly, is it not, because until very recently we didn't really have any infrastructure for bicycles. I wouldn't have gone out on a bicycle a couple of years ago. It's dangerous. Drivers here get very close to cyclists, and we hear about deaths every year.
Yeah, that's right, yes. People keep thinking that is the culture, and this is what sort of holds us attached to the cars. Okay, that's part of the reason, but the main reason is the infrastructure. It has been proven in many, many cases all over the world that the habits of people regarding how they move in their town, in their city, it's very much dependent on the infrastructure that is available. If you make infrastructure for cars, people will turn to cars. If you make infrastructure for bicycles, people will turn to bicycles. If you have good public transport, people will use it. So it's very much a question of government policy.
And yet, I've been in this business for an awful long time, and I can't recall how many transport ministers, going back probably 20 years, I've talked to about the fact that the public transport system, for example, will never work as long as we don't do something about the illegal parking in the left-hand lane in town, because bus lanes don't work, and we're starting to build bus lanes, but we still have cars using the bus lanes, people parking in the bus lanes, and the buses can't operate on time.
Yeah, that's right, yes. Unfortunately, all the governments we have had in the last 20 years, they neglected the public transport, terribly so. And as you said, they have done some things, but all half-hearted, so that they cannot be accused that they're not doing anything. But on the other hand, they don't do it. They don't mean it, if you know what I mean. It seems that people are so attached to the cars, and nobody wants to touch this subject. It's a sensitive subject. I would like to say that behind it there is strong financial interests. I mean, you can imagine with such a high number of cars per capita, the cost is enormous, and there is an industry around it. There's the companies importing the cars, garages, petrol stations, and on top of that, it's also government income, because a large slice of the price we pay for our petrol, for our cars, goes directly to the government. So all these reasons, together with the culture and the infrastructure and so on, they have held us back, and we're stuck with the cars.
Yeah, it's not joined up thinking, is it? They do a little bit one year and then they'll spend a lot of money on a consultation, and how many have there been just for Nicosia alone in terms of should we have trams, should we have buses, how to improve public transport, and as far as I'm aware they're all sitting in drawers in the Transport Ministry and none of them have ever been properly implemented.
Exactly. We are experts at making studies, and then we're experts at ignoring them. And, at the very most, we do a little bit here and a little bit there, and that's it. But nothing is being done sort of with determination. I mean, there's no policy, specific policy, and then we follow it. Unfortunately, this is a situation with cars, with transport, with most things. I would like to sort of give some more detail about the studies. In Nicosia, there was a study that was done in 2010. It was called Integrated Study for Mobility in Nicosia, and it stayed there for 10 years, and very little has been done out of it. Now, recently, in 2017, there was a similar study being carried out in Limassol. It's called SUMP, Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, in Greek is SVAC. And it's exactly this. It studies the way people move around the town and makes suggestions. And the suggestions are directed on how to reduce the number of cars and how to make the move towards a sustainable mobility. And sustainable mobility means giving emphasis, attaching importance, giving priority on ways to move in town that are less harmful to the environment. There are more sociable ways, and there are also cheaper ways. So there's 3 pylons. One is the environment, the other is economy, and the other is the cost. Unfortunately, these studies, they have stayed in the drawer, or, very, very little is being done, and very little is actually being talked about. I mean, very rarely you will see anything being talked about in papers, and this is unacceptable.
Right, I want to come in a moment to your outlining of the actual cost of car ownership, but I'm wondering, on the basis of what you've just been saying, whether you think we should follow London's example and introduce a charge for people driving in the centre of our towns.
There is a number of measures that can be taken to reduce the number of cars. First of all, the most important is infrastructure. If we keep new roads all the time, then people will use a car more and more. If you make more bicycle ways, people will use the bicycles more. Of course, these are sensible, they are applicable measures. They are measures that have been proven elsewhere that they are effective. But there are also other measures, like you mentioned. Most cities in Europe now, they have a car-free centre. They have pedestrian walkways and squares where only pedestrians can walk. Now, this is something that can be done in Cyprus as well, but it's just taking time. And, of course, the other thing to do is to make parking more expensive. When you are in the city centre or near the city centre, then you pay more, so that people are encouraged to use the public transport and not to use the cars.
If, of course, the public transport exists and runs efficiently.
Yes, that's another issue. First of all, you have to make a good sort of public transport system, and then you apply measures to reduce the use of cars. If you do it the other way, it's disastrous.
Well, we've done it every which way, but nothing works.
Yes.
Let's talk then about this cost of car ownership. You go into great detail about the average family car currently costing around 25,000, I guess that's to buy, but it's going to be with you for something like, what, 12 or 15 years probably before you sell it on?
That's right, yes. That's the average life of a car. It can be less or more, but that's about average. It's about 15 years.
So tell us a little bit about the costs that you've gone into in terms of batteries, maintenance. You mentioned already the fuel, but the total cost you worked out at being what?
Yes. Well, first of all, is the cost of buying the car. So if you divide it, if you work out the depreciation for the next 15 years, it's about 1,600 euros per year. Then you have to consider the cost of petrol. You have to consider the cost of maintenance, insurance, changing of the tires, the MOT certificate, washing the car, parking, and so many other unusual costs. I mean, extraordinary costs, should I say, we have with the cars. When you work on all these costs out, it's incredible how much we pay for cars, and we consider it normal, to pay this large amount of money every month just to have the facility for the car. And I would like to add another little note about the car. The car is probably one of the most expensive things we have in our houses, and we only use it for about 2 hours a day. For the other 22 hours, it's just sitting there. And then we pay this enormous cost. I worked it out, adding all these costs that I just mentioned, and it comes to about 4,300 euros per year. And if you divide it into months, it comes to 358 euros per month. And I would like to say that this is actually a very conservative calculation. For a simple car, which is about 1,500 cc's, obviously, if we have a more expensive car, a luxury car, the cost just rises tremendously. It can be double or even more. So that's the cost of one car. It's about 360 euros per month. Now, the other thing is that, which is very interesting, is the number of cars we have per household. Now, according to the latest study that was done for Limassol, which is roughly, it's very roughly the same for the rest of Cyprus, each household in Cyprus has 2.7 cars. 2.7 cars, each household. So, if we multiply 2.7 by 358, we come to an incredible amount of 960 euros per month.
That's the cost to the household of 2 cars?
That's right. That's the cost of an average car to an average household in Cyprus. And the other interesting thing is that there are some households that have even more cars. There are households that have 4, 5, or even 7 cars. The study that was done for Limassol, they found that at least 4% of households, they have 6 cars or more.
Wow. And they're just sitting in garages, I imagine, most of the time.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, now then you compared that to what would be the cost of using public transport.
Yeah, well, that's very easy. The cost of public transport in Nicosia or Limassol is 40 euros per month. And this enables people to travel anywhere in their city for this amount, for 40 euros per month. So if you compare now 40 euros for a ticket that enables you to travel anywhere in town to the cost of a car, it's exactly 1/10. I mean, it's so much cheaper. We could save such large amounts of money if we had a decent fleet of buses in our cities, and if we stop using the cars so much.
And also, may I suggest, Yannis, if we had buses, smart buses, like you get in other European cities, where you know at the bus stop how many minutes it will be until the next bus arrives. You can plan your journey. You don't have to go to a central point to change buses. They're all somehow connected up so that whichever direction you want to go in is relatively simple.
Yep. There is number of issues that must be determined in order to have a decent fleet of buses. One of them is the frequency, as you mentioned. At the moment, I don't know exactly what is the situation in Nicosia, but in Limassol, it's anybody's guess. You may be standing at the bus stop and you can be waiting for at least an hour for the bus to arrive. And understandably, people just get angry and they don't want to use the bus again. So one thing is the frequency. And according to the study that was done for Limassol, this frequency must be of the order of 20 minutes for each bus service, and at peak hours, 10 minutes. So that's one thing, it's the frequency of buses. The other thing is information. You need informed people want to know what the buses arrive, and they also need to know roughly what time they will be at their destination. So we need good information system. Now, these are not anything extraordinary or anything that needs high cost or is high technology or whatever. These are things that are used in most cities in the world. It's so easy now to travel anywhere in Europe, even if you don't know the city. You can just pick up your mobile and you say, I want to go to road so-and-so, number so-and-so, and immediately it will come up with the bus service that you need. It will tell you what time it will come to the bus stop. It will tell you where to change, and it will tell you roughly what time you'll be at your destination. Now, if you have this service, which is not much to ask for, then people will use the buses a lot more.
How far is this, Yanis, a little bit of a chicken and egg problem? Because you mentioned the frequency of buses, but the bus companies are not going to be able to lay on buses that frequently if there are only 4 or 5 passengers in each bus. So what do you do first?
Yeah, exactly. It's a question of chicken and egg. Exactly. So what needs to be done, first of all, is you provide the service. You provide the service and you make the service decent and reliable from the beginning, even if people don't use it much. And at the same time, you do promotion for the service. We have never ever seen in Cyprus any campaign encouraging people to use the buses, ever. These things, they go together. When you improve the service, you do a campaign, advertising campaign, if you like, a promotion campaign or whatever, and then at the same time, you increase the parking fees in the center of town and elsewhere. And at this point, I'd like to say that parking is a very effective way of regulating the number of cars. So the more expensive it is, as you increase the cost of parking, people will think, it's too expensive to go to the city centre, but it's much cheaper to go with the bus. Let's go with the bus.
Will they think that, Yanis? My point here being, I know that in Nicosia for several years, I'm not sure if they do still run, I think they do, there were minibuses so that you could park fairly close to the centre, but then hop on one of the free minibuses to get to the old part of town. And it seems to me that Cypriots just think buses are not for me. I can afford a car, and therefore I'm going to drive my car. It seems that we think that buses are for foreigners, migrants, people who can't afford a car. So it's almost a status thing.
Yes, that's a popular view. But it's not entirely true, may I say. A lot of people think that it's a culture. Cypriots are not for buses, they're not for bicycles, they like to have their own expensive cars, they like large cars and so on. But in fact, when Cypriots travel, when they go abroad, when they go to Athens or to London or Paris or whatever, they're very happy to use the bus. So what is it that changes the culture? Is it getting on the airport? Does the culture change there? I don't think so. I think it's very much a question of providing the service. If you provide the service and it's cheap and it's reliable, and also if it is decent. I mean, if you have dirty buses, for example, or if people smoke and so on, people won't go there. But it's not difficult to make these things. I mean, decent buses, they're so common everywhere else in the world. It's not high technology. They don't cost too much. So what is it that is actually stopping us?
And you haven't been able to come up with an answer for that yet, have you?
Well, the answer is, I think the government has to make the first step, and the culture will follow. If the government really change their views about transportation, if they really attach importance to the environment, to the gases coming out of cars, and if they provide a decent fleet of buses, people will use them gradually. It won't happen overnight. People won't say, we're going to throw our 2.7 cars away. Maybe they will reduce it instead of having 2.7. I say 2.7, could be 3, could be 2, and so on. But they will say, why have 3 cars? Let's have 2 cars, and if we need to go somewhere, we can use the bus. Or they can say, for example, to their children, you don't need to buy a car now that you're 18 years old. You can go there with the bus. You're old enough to use the bus, and so on. So use will be reduced gradually, and eventually we could come into a situation where people have 1 car per household. That would be really an achievement. And eventually, why not have no cars? Why do we need the cars? Why do we have to pay so much to have these cars standing outside our houses? I would like to also say that there are several cities now already planning their transportation system on the philosophy that no private cars. Helsinki is one of them. They already planned it. They started planning it, I think, in 2018. And they actually planning the transportation system so that by 2025, people will not need to have a car. There is already some very clever ways of enabling people to move from anywhere in their cities with public transport. I mean, now the technological means are tremendous. There's so many ways, so many things that can be done. And we're still stuck, with traditional cars, with petrol, with parking, with parking spaces, with petrol stations and so on. I think in the next few years we are going to see tremendous changes in the field of transportation.
Well, we won't until we stop building new roads, will we? Every time an election comes up, it seems that whoever's sitting in the presidential palace suddenly starts approving all sorts of plans for new roads, new highways to mountain villages. We see it every time, and it's a bit like if you move to a bigger house, you suddenly find you've got an awful lot more stuff because you've got more cupboards. And so it just seems to be encouraging car use rather than looking at the alternatives.
It's again a chicken and egg situation. People in the villages, when you ask them what do you want, they will always say more roads. If you say, but you already have a road, yes, but it takes a long time and it's better if you have a better road. So you say, okay, let's sit down and study. Then you study it and you find that the road is actually pretty good. You could always make it better. And people would save maybe 5 or 10 minutes to go faster to their destination. This is a very common situation with most villages. People will always, if you ask them what they want, they'll say better road. And then when you work out, does it really make so much difference to the life of people if they can go down to Nicosia or Limassol or Larnaca 5 minutes less? Does it really make so much difference? And is it really correct to spend 170 million of euros to make the journey 5 minutes shorter?
At the cost of the environment and the land which is lost and concreted, because we haven't even talked about the fact that we're losing so much of our pristine nature spots to more and more roads.
Yeah. According to some European EU standards, we have one of the best suburban, outside cities, road network, one of the best. It's actually very, very good. And all the time, the politicians, they're always promising new roads because people like it. People are asking for new roads. So they think, if we make new, better roads, then we get more votes. But somebody has to stand up with a vision and realize that new roads are not to the benefit of the country or the people.
Well, you've certainly done that with a fascinating article. Now, where can people read this in full, Yannis? I know it was published by the Technical Chamber. I could only find it in Greek when I looked, but I'm sure that somewhere it's available in English.
No, unfortunately, hasn't been translated, to my knowledge. It was published in the Tech magazine, and then the Green Party, the press office, they distributed it to several newspapers. I know Philadelphios and Politis published it, and in some of them they chopped it in several areas. But I also put it in Facebook. And,
well, I confess to you that, I can read Greek, but I couldn't understand it that much. I did go to your Facebook posts, found it and hit the translation, and it's pretty good. So if people can do that, or if you can put it out somewhere else, perhaps I'll share it if I can, or copy and paste it, because it is absolutely information that we should have at our fingertips. So many of us just hopping into a car, as you say, once a day. And then, of course, if you do want people to get on their bikes or walk, the only other problem we have here is, of course, the weather, because in the summer it's far too hot and most of our roads are no longer shaded.
Yes, that is a problem, but it's not so serious. I've talked to several people, English people, German people, and so on. And do you know what they say? When you say to them that it's the weather, it's too hot really to go on the bicycle, they say, quite the opposite. I think you have the ideal weather for bicycle, because they're thinking about their very cold weather in their own countries. And I have videos and photographs of people in Scandinavian countries, in Sweden and Norway, using their bicycles in very, very cold weather. And they use it. It's a question of habit. Also in Holland, people use their bicycles tremendously, and in other countries. I will agree with you that we have the other problem. We don't have very cold winters. We have hot summers. But that can be... How many months does the really hot weather last in Cyprus? Well, that really, it makes cycling really uncomfortable. 2 months, 3 months? So why not use a bicycle the other 9 months?
It really is a question of changing our attitudes, isn't it?
Yes. And of course we can make, why cycling in hot weather is so bad? It's because maybe you feel hot, you get sweaty, and you don't want to go to the office like this. But we can always use electric bicycles, or bicycles that are electrically assisted. So if you do that, then you find that you don't get so hot. And also, the other thing is that when you travel on the bicycle, you're exposed to the air, so that air is actually cooling the body, so you don't get so hot.
And the other alternative, of course, is for particularly government offices with so many employees and other big companies, installing showers so that when you cycle to work, you can have a shower, change, and go to your desk.
Yes, that's another way. It's not so easy to do. You can't do it from one day to the other. You cannot go to government offices and say, by next week we want to have showers. That takes time. But I agree with you, that could be one of the things that could be done in buildings. I know it would cost a little bit, but then the savings are enormous. And by turning to bicycles, we don't only save money, the bicycle is also much healthier. It's a much healthier way to travel, to move around town, and it's also much more pleasant.
Yeah, so you get your exercise and you're not polluting the environment. In fact, it's a win-win all round. Yanni, we're out of time. I have to stop it there. Fascinating chat. And let's hope that maybe somebody in a position of power will read your article, take it on board and start to do something about the appalling problems that we have in terms of car use on this island. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me.
That is Yannis Gagoulis, Limassol District Secretary of the Cyprus Technical Chamber ETEC, and I'll find a way of sharing his article with you on Facebook. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.